Oh, hi. Welcome to Aquatazoo, where we like to nerd out over all things zoo and aquarium related. I'm Lori Semple, and today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about dealing with geriatric and end-of-life issues for animals. So we've discussed in the past about euthanasia and all of the very complicated decision-making that goes into that particular topic, so I won't go too far into that part. But what about when an animal is still living the great life and has lots of time left in a zoo or aquarium? How do we handle that situation? In a best case scenario, I suppose we just keep on doing what we're doing. Why mess with a good thing, right? In some cases, though, we do need to keep a closer eye on what's going on. So that means evaluating an animal's welfare perhaps more often or by different values on occasion. We just have to take a closer look at the situation, talk it over with our leadership, management, our vets, and come to a conclusion about how we're going to handle the life of that animal from here on out. But let me back up for a minute. So what brought this up in my brain was a rather high-profile giraffe. I don't know if you remember, I think it was 2017, April the giraffe was an internet sensation because she was heavily pregnant and everyone was waiting for her to have her calf on camera. And her stall was outfitted with cameras that were running a feed 24/7, and everyone was very excited to see this giraffe give birth. And eventually she did and had a successful little baby, and it was awesome. So she became a star overnight, right? Well, recently she did have to be euthanized, and it kind of brought to my brain, well, how did they decide to do that? Which we've gone over with euthanasia. But up until the point where they had decided that she needed to be euthanized, they had been dealing with various issues with arthritis in her legs and feet. So that is a serious issue for an animal like a giraffe. Any kind of hoof stock, really. They depend heavily on mobility and the health of their legs and extremities to live a full and good life. So that means that they had to help her manage the symptoms that she was probably feeling and make sure that she was comfortable and living her best life, even with the arthritis that was plaguing her, up until they couldn't really help anymore, and at that point it's more humane to euthanize. We've gone over how that works with the euthanasia podcast, so feel free to revisit if you don't remember. It's a very humane decision, I think, on behalf of the best life for that animal. And can we provide the best opportunity for them to thrive? If we no longer can, well, then we need to have a discussion and make some other decisions. So that is the main story that led me down this path of thinking about older animals and how we manage them when they're in good enough shape and they're happy enough, thriving well enough that they can continue living. But we want to make sure that we don't miss anything. Animals are really good at hiding the fact that they're uncomfortable, and we want to make sure that we are paying very close attention so that if something were to change for them, that we can respond and help them out as needed. So these are the animals that we're talking about now. You know, your happy little dog with a little gray snout, showing the age, but still loving life, you know. Yes, we want to keep that animal around. We want them to live their best life and be as happy as possible, as comfortable as possible. And we keep a closer eye on these animals than most of the others. Not that we don't care as much about the others, but we just need to make sure that they are in fact comfortable and that we aren't missing something. You know, maybe they would just need an anti-inflammatory for their little joints or something like that. If there's something that we can help them with, or maybe I used to work at a facility where we had an older duck. Bless her little heart, she was so cute, but she needed a little bit more help than the other ducks to get into their little water pool. So she had to have a ramp. We got her a little ramp and she was happy as can be. So it's just little stuff like that. They may need just a little help, and we need to be observant and ready to respond to give them the help they need. All right, so let's talk about some older animals. Just like the old duck, I've worked with older seals that have trouble seeing, so we give them some eye drops to make sure that their vision is as good as it can be and their eyes aren't hurting them at all, and they live a good, healthy, long life. In the wild, let's just talk about what would happen there. You got a blind seal. Guess what? That blind seal is not going to last very long. You understand. I'm sure you do. Nature takes its course. A lot of these animals would theoretically perish due to some sort of ailment or a predatory issue, something like that, before they reach this point of animal old age. Okay? I'm just throwing that out there. You know it. I'm sure you understand. At one point in my career, for example, I was dealing with an exhibit that had many sharks in it, right? Well, it turns out all of these sharks were 25 to 35 years old, and we got to the point where we lost two in a relatively short period of time. And even though folks wanted to jump down my throat like I don't know how to take care of sharks, I had to point out the fact that these animals were 25 to 35 years old, right? We're just guessing because it's hard to tell exactly how old some of these animals are because it kind of depends on what they ate when they were younger as to how big and how quickly they grew, you know. So, people are upset with me. Why are the sharks dying? What'd you do? Why can't you do your job? Whatever. It's fine. I had to point out that the mean lifespan that we are aware of, as far as science has taught us, for this particular species of shark was 12 years. These animals were pushing 30, if not older. So I think we did okay. We had some sharks that were elderly and had lived very good, long lives. So when you throw out a number like a median life expectancy, yes, that takes into account animals that probably would have died when they were very young due to probably predation or some other sorts of problems. And then you're dealing with animals that got older, started losing their vision, that kind of thing. Like, in the end, once you average out all of those animals, in this particular case, we came out with an average of 12. You do not expect one of these sharks to live past 12, period. In the wild, right? There are some that go older, there are some that are younger when they perish. So it happens. But the point was, if these animals that we had in our exhibit had been out in the wild, they most likely would have succumbed to something else, whether it was choking on trash or getting caught by a fisherman or, falling prey to another shark, something like that. Anything could have happened to them. They probably would not have lived past 12. So we did pretty well. But the fact that some animals live a darn long time in zoos and aquariums, we deal with an issue that you wouldn't normally see on your African savanna, and that is older animals. Older animals, just like older people, we all have our issues, right? So some of them might get arthritis in their joints. Some of us might have a bad back. Some of us lose our eyesight. It's just part of aging, and we, just like people, would like for them to age gracefully and comfortably, and we try to make sure that they have everything they need to do so. In the past, I've worked with green moray eels, and as green moray eels get older, past where they would normally live in the wild, they start to develop some eye problems. And this really tends to hamper their ability to find food. And so in the past, I've had to actually go in and dive with them and feed them at their little home site that they have chosen for themselves just to help them out because they can't seem to navigate very well to train the way that they had before. And I have learned now to pair a visual cue for, say, a target for them to come touch and they get their food, so I can manipulate where they go in order to get their food. I've had to pair that with an auditory type cue so that they can hear it as well, and now they know. So even as their eyesight deteriorates, they can hear it, and then they can kind of depend on the path that they know the best because they've traveled it many times to get to where their food is. If they can't get there, yeah, I'll go in and dive and bring it to them, little DoorDash, if you will. But in the past, I've tried to pair those cues together so that they can take a path that's familiar with them, that they feel comfortable doing, and they still know when it's dinner time. They know when I'm up there ready to go, so they don't have to sit around waiting for me and it's a win-win situation. They find their food despite their eye problems, and it gives me a chance to take a look at their eyes to see if it's getting any better or any worse, or if I need to intervene somehow. And I would like to add that cataract surgery on a green moray eel can be successful and prolong their life even further so that they live happy and healthy despite being old. And that's great. So what do we do? How do we figure out that an animal is getting older, they're having trouble? Obviously, as keepers, we're keeping an eye on what our animals are up to, how's their behavior, what's changed, and we tend to recognize patterns of decline. And maybe an animal is having trouble navigating because of their eyesight. Maybe they're just a little slow to get up and down because their joints might be hurting. It's the same thing you do as a pet owner. You see that your dog's a little slow to get up. Well, they might be having some hip issues. You might want to get that checked out. So whenever we notice something out of the ordinary, might be slight, it might just be a today issue as opposed to an ultimate old age issue, we usually first point that out to the vet and have them take a look, see if we need to run some tests to get down to the root of the problem. So if the vet takes a look and determines that, yeah, we might have an issue, there'll probably be some more tests run. Might do x-rays, ultrasound, CT scan, all the stuff that you would probably do for a person, honestly. Look in their eyes, look in their mouth, all the physical stuff, and then run some blood work and all that just to see if we can figure out exactly what the problem is. Why are we having this ailment? Why is your appetite decreased? For example, that's usually one of the first issues that we have. Something along the lines of the feeding is unusual that alerts a keeper's attention in a hurry. Then, once tests are run and you've kind of got an idea of what's going on, then you have a discussion about quality of life and how it can be improved. When we're going to make a call to have a discussion about other options, say we do need to euthanize, say there is a quick decline, anything like that. That's when this discussion happens after an animal's been pointed out to a vet and tested. We've got a ballpark issue of what's going on. That's when we start having these more difficult talks. Most of the time, it will start off with a general, how often are we going to evaluate welfare? Well, it's going to be way more often than it's happening right now. For fish, since I work in an aquarium, I will tell you that we do animal welfare assessments pretty much twice a day for all of our systems. And when we notice more problems, they're going to happen more often than that. So we're going to come out and take a look multiple times a day when we have a moment or two to just come observe at unusual times, because typically when we do our welfare assessments, it's once in the morning, once in the afternoon. So that's a pretty routine issue. So we'll probably come out a little bit more often, catch animals at non-peak times as far as we are concerned, and observe what they're doing when we are normally not around to watch what they're doing specifically. So what was a 2 times a day type affair might turn into a 6 times a day type affair. And that's okay. We're usually swinging by anyway, so we'll probably take a look and see what our animal is up to. If we notice something different in that time and we're concerned that the animal's welfare is not very good or is declining, then we will bring it up to our vets, bring it up to our managers, and have a deeper discussion about what we should do. At this point, when we're evaluating an animal's welfare repeatedly, more often than we would normally for age-related and quality of life issues, we will develop a new tool for that a lot of the time. And by that, we make a sheet specific to that individual or specific to that species in some cases, depending on what you're looking at that's aging out. And we'll come up with criteria for what looks like a healthy, normal, happy animal versus what is an ailing, troubled, uncomfortable animal. This is a great time where we sit down and discuss what we're really seeing, how we're going to evaluate what we might see, how do we recognize signs, when do we make a call to our vet staff to try and figure something else out, who has the authority to make the next decision that needs to be made, that kind of stuff. All goes into this little tool. It might just be a little sheet of paper that says, oh, did they respond when you entered the room? Did they eat their entire diet as usual? Did they occupy their normal sleeping spot for the evening? That sort of stuff. The things that you would qualify as normal for that animal. It's very specific because we want to make sure that we're incorporating the individual, not just the species. And we want to make sure that the tool that we're using to evaluate their welfare is tailored specifically to them. So we get into the dirty details of what that animal's life is like, how we recognize whether they're feeling okay, whether they're feeling normal, whether they're stressed out and not feeling so comfortable. All of those things we have to discuss and put into a usable tool that any of our keepers could come in and use to evaluate the current welfare of that animal. Developing a tool like this is really, really helpful because not only does it sort of help to open up these really difficult conversations. Listen, talking about euthanasia is not fun. It is not something that we like to do, but we will do it for the good of the animal, you know. But this is kind of a precursor to that because eventually you may get to that point with this animal. It may die of natural causes on its own, all comfortable. Who knows? But ultimately, we want it to be in the best living situation that it can. We don't want them to suffer. So we will have these difficult conversations, and this one that starts the quality of life for an elderly animal, that sort of discussion really helps things along and gets people comfortable with discussing life versus death versus an animal's welfare, good, bad, how does it look, where are we going, what is everyone's thoughts about this process. I think doing this also helps expose less experienced keepers to something that's a really tough part of the job. And it's not all super glamorous on show with an animal in your arms kind of thing. This is the hard part. This is when you're learning animals are not going to be around forever. Life is finite. And you have to confront this and talk it out, honestly. And it's okay. Everyone's just as bummed as you are that we're approaching this point in time with an animal who I'm sure everyone loves. So it's a tough thing to deal with, but having these beginning discussions about it kind of exposes them a little bit to what will probably end up happening in the end. Listen, no one likes to say goodbye to these animals. It's sad. We love them. We want them to be with us forever, but time doesn't work that way. So once you've got the little tool that you've developed, a way to specifically evaluate that animal and its quality of life, and you're using it regularly to decide, is this good? Is this bad? How many good days have we had in a row? How many times has it started to decline? Okay, it's been declining. We need to talk about what to do next. So that's sort of what got me thinking about April the giraffe. They had tried to manage her condition, but ultimately anti-inflammatories and that sort of thing can only get you so far. There comes a point, especially for an animal like a giraffe, where if they don't have mobility, they really have poor quality of life. And that's not to say that just because an animal has arthritis that we're going to put it down or something like that. It depends on that species, on that individual animal. For a giraffe specifically, that's a really hard position to put a giraffe in, and it's really just a poor quality of life. If they can't move around on their own, they can't reach things like they normally do, it is very impactful for their quality of life, where another animal, it might not matter nearly as much. And yes, sometimes we'll just turn to medications to help them manage it. Heck, we do it for people. Why not do it for animals too? I know in the past when I've dealt with the elderly sharks again, of course they come back, we were concerned that we were going to lose another one of these sharks. They were all roughly the same age. Like I said, a couple of them had gone in a short period of time within weeks of each other, and it was concerning. I was watching another one of them wondering, is this it? Is this all we can do? Is this animal about to die? We talked it over with our vets, and he, being familiar with the situation and dealing with elderly male sharks of this type, it was very oddly specific. Thankfully, we had him as our vet, but he was well versed in what happens and knew that this particular shark has a problem with their kidneys as they get older. And so he prescribed some medication to prolong the effort of the shark's kidneys. And we had that animal living, as far as I could tell, quite normally for several more years. So while I was under the impression that the end was nigh for this animal, medication helped prolong his life and give him a good quality of life. So the medication was easy to administer. We just put some pills into his food, and he had no idea. We were able to prolong his life by several years, and he lived very normally during that time. So yeah, medication helped, and it helped manage the issues that he was having. He didn't look so good. I knew he was uncomfortable, but then we got the medication in and he was feeling much more comfortable. He lived a normal life for many more years. I'm happy with that. I wouldn't have done it if it was going to prolong a life that was not worth living, if that makes sense. I wouldn't have subjected him to living longer by force in an uncomfortable situation. But as far as I could tell, that animal was very comfortable, living a normal life, acting the way he always had. And I was totally happy with helping him manage the symptoms and letting him live comfortably. I'll tell you though, sometimes it's hard to tell with aquatic animals, sharks in particular, like, are you comfortable? Are you not comfortable? They can't emote in their face very well. And so I just have to guess by their body language and how they respond to various different stimuli, whether it's a diver or food or something like that. That's how I know, watching them throughout their lives. That's how I figure out whether they are comfortable, they're not comfortable. Just very subtle when it comes to fish, I gotta tell you. There are also some facilities, zoos and aquariums, that have a geriatric area for their animals. So when some animals get older, they're not as able to move around, maybe. They're not as colorful or as active as they once were. That's totally fine. We love them anyway. We might move them off exhibit. And that's just because we want them to be comfortable, however they need to be. So that might mean that we have a more accessible area for them to use somewhere else in our facility that's not on the exhibit. And also, we don't have people pounding on windows and trying to flash them in the face with their cameras and all that kind of stuff. It's a stressful environment in zoos and aquariums. Animals adapt to it very well. And while they're young and spry, they might even come to enjoy it. And that's great, but older animals may be less tolerant. Listen, we know how this goes with people, right? Some people are all about being stimulated and greeting everyone and all that fun stuff. And then as they get older, they get a little crotchety, if you will. And that's okay. Some facilities are able to bring those animals into kind of old time homes, meant in the most respectful and positive of meanings, of course. And these animals can just comfortably live out their days however they would like, doing whatever they'd like, off exhibit, away from rowdy folks trying to pound on the windows, And that's cool too. Just like the duck that needed a ramp, we might move them to the back just because it's easier for those animals to access the things that they need. And we want them to be as comfortable as possible. So if that means being on exhibit, great. If you're less stressed out there, go for it. Live out your life, do your thing. And if you can't, if you're having trouble dealing with the stresses of being on exhibit, then we might bring them to the back and just let them hang out there as long as they would like. So the point is that we put a lot of thought into this. We want, ultimately, no matter what, for the animal's welfare to be awesome. We are aiming for the highest possible animal welfare that we can muster. And so, given that it changes day by day, minute by minute, we have to be aware of even those long declines, say over a lifetime. So we do everything we can to make things easier, make things better for them. If that means that we need to move them to an area off exhibit so that they can live out their life in peace, then we will do that. If that means that we need to offer them some medication to help them deal with their sore joints, we will do that as well. It's just a matter of the keeper keeping an eye on the animal and the animal's welfare, and there being kind of an open dialogue between all of the staff in the animal care areas between the vets and the managers and the keepers to have these difficult conversations, and everyone understands what good animal welfare looks like for this animal in particular, and what the decline looks like, and how do we address that. For some animals, that might mean that we make the decision to euthanize them for their best interests. They may not live a great life in the situation where they are right now, and that means that we might have to make a decision on their behalf because otherwise they might suffer. We don't want any animals to suffer. So if we can't provide what they need and there's not a good prognosis for us to be able to provide that for that animal, even if we had to give that animal to another facility, send it somewhere else, or bring in a specialist, that kind of thing. If we can't do any of the options that we've got available to us, we may opt to euthanize. And it's not an easy decision. It's one that we have now gone through all the steps to decide, okay, when do we make this call? When do we have this discussion? What does good look like? What does bad look like? All these things have kind of come to a head, and we will make the decision to euthanize as needed. Ugh, it stinks. I hate it. Euthanizing animals is so sad, but it's ultimately for their good. We need to do it sometimes because we do not want an animal to suffer. So it's not all bad, but it just stinks when you're the animal caretaker and you just are sad to see one of your favorite animals go. Hurts my heart. But don't worry. We try to give our animals the chance to get to the point that they're geriatric. In the wild, they might not have such a luxury. They might get picked off by a predator, something like that. But we, in our zoos and aquariums, more often than at least in the wild, have the chance to have an elderly little animal with a gray face because the color's gone out of its fur or scales or whatever. And that's cool. It's kind of nice to be able to give an animal the opportunity to live that long when they probably wouldn't in the wild. And it's true. These animals have personality. They'll tell you to get off their lawn if they don't like you there. They get just as old and crotchety as people. Sometimes, as they get older and they have those special accommodations necessary, they're almost more endearing. I'm telling you, the duck with the ramp was so stinking cute. I loved it. Just a little ramp. She'd hobble up down into the water. Everybody loved her. It was great. But she just needed her special ramp to get her old bones up and into the water. So there you go. I don't want to leave you on a down note, so, just think about an old, say, turtle shaking its cane at somebody yelling to get off the lawn. It always makes me smile. Well, I think that's about all I have to say for quality of life, animal welfare assessments for elderly animals specifically, how we handle geriatric cases before making the decision to euthanize an animal if that's the route we opt to take. But I know it's a difficult subject. It's not fun to talk about and it's not fun to experience. But if you have any questions about it, please feel free to let me know. If you have questions about that or any zoo and aquarium stuff or leadership and management things, feel free to let me know. You can find me at aquatazoo@gmail.com. If you would prefer to @ me on Twitter, you can do that at aquatazoo. If you're enjoying the show, and I hope you do, don't forget you can subscribe on your podcast player of choice. And if you're so inclined, feel free to leave a rating or review so I have a little feedback to let me know that I'm on the right track or I'm not on the right track, that I'm helping you out, giving you content that you enjoy and or find useful. Okay, thanks for listening. I heart your faces. Okay, bye.